They say blood is thicker than water, but they forget that blood is also much easier to spill and far harder to clean up when it stains the carpet of a broken home. My story didn't start with a tragedy. It started with a birthday gift that felt more like a death warrant. On the day I turned 18, while my peers were dreaming of cheap beer and coastal road trips, I was handed a heavy, rusted key and a sealed envelope from my late grandfather, Silas. He was the only man in the Sterling dynasty who looked at me with something other than calculated indifference. My parents, Victor and Eleanor, had spent 2 decades sculpting my younger brother, Leo, into a masterpiece of corporate elegance, while I was merely the rough draft they forgot to discard. The envelope contained the details of a private trust, but it wasn't just money. It was a ledger of secrets and a sum of wealth that dwarfed my father's struggling architecture firm. When my parents found out, the atmosphere in our glass-walled mansion in Silveridge shifted from cold to predatory. They didn't ask for the money. They demanded it as if it were a tax I owed for the air I breathed. They claimed Leo needed it for an elite Ivy League education to save the family legacy, despite the fact that they were already wealthy enough to buy a small island. But Silas had warned me in his letter. The foundation of this house is built on debt and lies, Julian. Keep this key close, for it is the only thing that will keep you from drowning when the storm hits. When I refused to sign over the rights, the masks finally slipped. There was no screaming, just a terrifying, clinical silence. My father told me that if I chose the money over the family, I was no longer a Sterling. They gave me 1 hour to pack. My brother, Leo, the golden boy with a smile like polished marble, stood by the staircase, watching me drag my suitcase across the hardwood floor. He didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes wasn't pity. It was a hunger I didn't understand yet. I walked out into the rain, 18 and wealthy on paper, but utterly homeless in spirit. For 6 years, I vanished into the gray noise of the city, building my own tech firm under a pseudonym, waiting for the shadows of Silveridge to find me again. 6 years of silence is a long time to reconstruct a soul. I had succeeded beyond my wildest dreams, not by using Silas's money, which I kept untouched as a silent insurance policy, a lay through sheer, spiteful ambition. Then, the phone rang. It was a number I had blocked years ago, originating from a burner phone. It was my mother. Her voice, once like a sharpened blade, was now a dull, rusted saw. She wasn't calling to reconcile. She was calling because the Sterling Group was hemorrhaging blood, and they needed a transfusion. The rumors I'd gathered through my own private investigators suggested a simple collapse after the global recession, but as I listened to her sob, I realized the rot went deeper. She told me about Leo's spectacular fall from grace. He had been engaged to Beatrice Vane, the heiress to a shipping conglomerate that would have provided the ultimate bailout for my parents' failing firm. But Beatrice had found more than just dating apps on Leo's phone. My investigators discovered that Leo wasn't just a serial cheater. He was a corporate spy who had been selling the Vane family's trade secrets to offshore entities to cover his own gambling debts. He hadn't just broken an engagement. He had invited a federal investigation into the Sterling household. My parents, in their blind desperation, had already spent the verbal investment Beatrice's father had promised, sinking millions into a doomed expansion project. The irony was delicious, yet bitter. My mother begged for a meeting, claiming they had realized their karma. But as I sat in my high-rise office, looking at the rusted key Silas gave me, I started to connect dots they didn't know I could see. Why was the grandfather's trust so protected? Why did they need my specific fund when they had their own assets? I decided to play the game. I would meet her, but not as the rejected son. I would meet her as the predator they had accidentally created. I agreed to a neutral location, a dimly lit library in the city, and prepared myself for the theater of lies that was about to unfold. I knew Leo was still in the house, despite my mother's claims that he had been cast out. I could smell the trap from miles away. When my mother arrived, she looked like a ghost haunting her own expensive clothes. She spent an hour weeping, offering a masterclass in performative guilt. She admitted they had always favored Leo, that they had misinterpreted my independence as selfishness. She claimed my father was too ashamed to face me, believing their financial ruin was a divine punishment for how they treated me 6 years ago. It was a compelling performance, almost enough to make a lesser man crumble. But then she mentioned the dinner. She wanted me to come back to the mansion to heal the wounds in person. I asked her point blank, "Is Leo still there?" She didn't hesitate. "No," she whispered. "We threw him out weeks ago. He's staying with friends. We don't even have his number." That was the first major slip. My private security had tracked Leo's GPS signal to the Sterling estate just 4 hours prior. He hadn't left. He was hiding in the basement offices, likely trying to shred evidence before the auditors arrived. The dinner wasn't an invitation to reconcile. It was a setup to get my biometric signature. I realized that the trust fund Silas left me wasn't just cash. It was the encrypted key to the company's internal servers, a deadman switch that Silas had installed to prevent my father from selling the firm to foreign rivals. I didn't call her out. Instead, I smiled, a cold, calculated expression I'd learned in boardrooms. I told her I would consider it, but I needed to verify some family records first. As she left, she looked disappointed, perhaps realizing I wasn't the malleable boy she remembered. I spent the next 48 hours digging into the Raven papers, the documents Silas had hidden in a safe deposit box that only my key could open. What I found was chilling. My father hadn't just run the business poorly. He and Leo had been embezzling from the company's pension fund for years. They didn't need my money to save the business. They needed it to replace the stolen millions. Before the authorities realized the vault was empty, they weren't looking for a son. They were looking for a fall guy. The family dinner was set for Sunday. I arrived, but I didn't come alone. I had a team of digital forensic experts waiting in a van a block away, and a legal dossier that could bury the Sterling name for a century. As I walked into the dining room, the air was thick with the scent of expensive roast lamb and desperation. My father finally appeared, looking haggard, his eyes darting toward my briefcase. The apology he gave was scripted, hollow, and smelled of scotch. He talked about legacy and sacrifice. He waited until the dessert was served to bring out the documents, a restructuring agreement that required my signature and the use of the trust's authorization codes. I leaned back, the rusted key heavy in my pocket. I told them I knew Leo was in the basement. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the walls were closing in. My mother's face transformed from a grieving matriarch to a snarling predator in seconds. "You owe us, Julian," she hissed. "We gave you life. We gave you this name." I laughed then, a genuine sound of amusement. I told them I had already redirected the trust fund. I hadn't spent it. I had used it to buy the debt of the Sterling Group from the Vane family. I didn't just have money anymore. I owned their mortgage, their firm, and the very chairs they were sitting on. The final twist came when I revealed the Raven papers. I watched the blood drain from my father's face as I detailed the exact dates and amounts they had stolen from their employees. I gave them an ultimatum. They had 24 hours to sign a full confession and hand over Leo to the authorities for corporate espionage, or I would release the encrypted files to the federal investigators. Waiting for my call, they tried to guilt-trip me one last time, calling me a monster. I simply reminded them that they were the ones who taught me how to survive without a heart. As I walked out of the house for the last time, I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. The Sterling dynasty didn't end with a bang or a whimper. It ended with a transaction. I am no longer a son, and they are no longer my family. I am simply the man who closed the account. The engine of my car hummed a low, predatory tune as I sat in the driveway of the Sterling estate for the last time. In my lap sat the final physical piece of Silas's legacy, a small, black obsidian box. I had recovered from the safe deposit box along with the Raven papers. I hadn't opened it in the house. I didn't want them to see the final card in my hand. Inside, there was no money, no gold, and no keys. There was only a single, handwritten letter from Silas and a DNA report dated 20 years ago. As I read the lines, the coldness in my chest solidified into something akin to a dark triumph. The report was mine. It confirmed what my parents had known since the day I was born. Victor Sterling was not my biological father. My mother had an affair with Silas's youngest son, the black sheep brother who had died in a suspicious car accident shortly before my birth. Silas had known the truth all along. He had watched Victor and Eleanor treat me like an interloper, an error in their perfect lineage. while they poured their souls into Leo, the rightful heir. Silas didn't leave me the trust fund out of simple grandfatherly love. He left it to me because I was the only true sterling left by blood. And he knew that giving me the keys to the kingdom would eventually lead to me burning the pretenders out of their nest. He had weaponized my rejection. He had waited 20 years for his ghost son to claim what was stolen. As I pulled away, I glanced at the rearview mirror. The lights in the mansion flickered and died. My digital team had just executed the final command, wiping the company's servers and freezing every personal account tied to my father's name. By tomorrow morning, the police would be at their door to discuss the pension fund, and Beatrice Vane's lawyers would be filing a racketeering lawsuit that would strip them of their remaining dignity. I realized then that I wasn't the hero of this story, nor was I just a victim seeking revenge. I was the precision tool Silas had spent a lifetime sharpening. I felt a strange sense of peace as the iron gates closed behind me. I wasn't going back to my office. I was going to the airport. The Sterling name was dead, and for the first time in my life, I was finally a nobody. And being a nobody felt like absolute power.